Hey everybody, so talking about spoilers for Prey, so roll the intro. So I'm gonna go by the same increments that I talked about in my regular review, and the first thing I wanted to talk about is the characters. So I talked a lot about how I thought, Amber Midthunder's performance kind of gave Naru, a bit of depth, the things that I saw that kind of helped with that. And again, talking about human characters in the Predator movies, this character in particular just had the most basic and efficient, motivation. She wants to be a hunter. It's not necessarily she wants to be a warrior per se, but she wants to be a hunter. In a lot of indigenous cultures in North America, being a hunter is pretty simultaneous with being a warrior. And so by default, I think for the Comanche tribe, and I can't speak for them, but it looks like, when you are a decent enough hunter, you are, worthy enough to be a good warrior. And this is obviously seen by when Tabi kills the mountain lion, brings it back, and it's mentioned earlier in the beginning that the war chief has a bad knee. They're in dire need of a new war chief. And so Tabi comes back, kills the mountain lion, and proves to everyone that, like, all right. And then the head chief, awards him, gives him the coup, and he is given the status of war chief, right? Anyways, that's kind of going on a bit of a tangent. But not only is she motivated by her overall motivations to, be a hunter, but like she's motivated because of the failure she had the night before. Which technically I would argue, yeah, she failed, but she had it. And Tabi even mentions this when they're tied to the tree. If you notice, if you go back, but the moment before she falls, she actually stabbed it right in the ribs. So she technically weakened it for Tabi. But like she had it, like she did, but she doesn't see it that way. Obviously because Tabi is, the war chief and the hero of the village. And so she's also motivated by that. Not necessarily, I wouldn't say, anger or resentment towards her brother, but she's more angry at like herself because she's like, oh, like I just didn't get it. I didn't do it. And so she failed, and she's proven herself to go out and try to track down this Muppets, which Jane, and if you saw in my interview, she clarified to me what Muppets is. And in the Comanche dub, they refer to it more in the Comanche language as the Muppets. Anyways, and with Naru though, like the thing I really enjoyed was that she fails a lot. When she fails, she kind of learns from her mistakes and tries to do better. Like just when she's trying to hunt for the rabbits with her tomahawk, she realizes that she's wasting energy going and grabbing it all the time. So that's when she decides to make the rope and then go in and make her new weapon, which upon watching it like for the fourth time, I just thought was really cool. And I didn't know that there's actually real type weapons very similar to that in Kung Fu. There's kind of the dart and rope stuff. She learned, and her failure with the bear I thought was interesting. And that bear fight. Oh, I honestly think if that bear didn't leave, it would have killed the feral predator. But anyways, that was one of my favorite scenes too, was that bear fight. It was just so cool and visceral, and it was just reminding me of The Revenant. It was just so fun. She really thinks, and that's what I really liked about her character as well, that maybe I didn't talk about in my other review, but I just liked how we actually get to see her think. We get to see some quick POVs like of her looking at the Predator's mask and then the lasers, and then illustrate, it's like literally its capabilities of the darts are illustrated when it tries to kill like the dog. And I just thought it was cool how we got to see her thinking and realizing, or she kind of had a Dutch moment when she recognizes that like the flour is what cools the body temperature, kind of like when Arnold was in the mud, and he even says to himself like,
he couldn't see me.
And I mentioned in my previous review, I talked about how Amber Midthunder balances like femininity with warrior energy. And to expound more on that, she isn't traditionally feminine in this film. She definitely is tomboyish, right? Especially among her own culture. But when I talk about femininity, I guess I was being really vague when I said that, but like, this sounds really Jungian, but like, women inherently just, have more creative energy. And so it's interesting to see throughout the film that she has a certain viewpoint that the men just didn't have or that they rejected. She knows about the herbs, right? She that was an advantage she had when they went on their original retrieving party. And she tells them, she's like, hey, like this is you, the Tutsiya, it helps. And they don't really quite listen to her about it, right? Or the fact that the fact that she is very creative about how they're gonna hunt down the lion. And Tabi mentions later, he's like, hey, like, it was your plan. It was because of your plan I was able to get the lion. And again, this is very Jungian, but like feminine energy, in my opinion, is inherently creative energy. And I guess that's just my very archetypical metaphorical mind stretching there for that, about how her character was both like a warrior and very feminine in that, and because she is a woman, and her whole life she's been taught about the herbs and everything. And that's the one thing too, like the herbs and knowing those things. Her way of fighting the predator was very passive, if you want to say it that way. It wasn't head on and direct as much. It wasn't as in your face, very masculine the way she fights it. It's very feminine, just in my opinion. I'm stretching here with that, but that was what I really meant by her balancing femininity and warrior energy, especially for a native woman. And then, as I talked before, is about Tabi. And now, so I can talk a little bit more about Tabi. I mentioned how I really thought he was just a cool character. And the thing is with Tabi is, I guess just from my personal perspective, Tabi is kind of the traditional, I guess, male character that we would think to see in a Predator movie like this, just in my opinion. He is very skilled. He's very competent. He killed that lion, no problem. His fight with the Predator is probably one of my most favorite fights in all of the Predator movies, especially the more recent ones. It's just, he really exemplifies a lot of how the Comanche fought as well. He uses the same arrow that entire fight, and then like he saw the Predator's stranded spear. You know what I mean? And he took advantage of that, and it was like, well, I'll use its own spear against it. You know what I mean? And I don't know. It's just going back to like what Dan and Jane mentioned in my interview with them, is about capturing the spirits of the ingenuity and the visceral adaptiveness of the Comanche people, of just how intensely they fought. And Tabi really captured that. Dakota Beavers did an amazing job of capturing that in his character. And I also mentioned how he was supportive of his sister. There's like the first time they go out tracking, looking for that one poor bastard who took on the lion by himself, Naru comes along, and everyone else is like, oh, yo, what are you gonna do? You're a woman. But Tabi like vouches for her. He like vouches for her in front of them. I thought that was actually really admirable for him. And then like, even when he comes back with the mountain lion corpse, he tries giving Naru kind of the benefit of the doubt. He's like, hey, we did it, but then she's all mad about it and everything. I just thought that was cool. Like, in that initial moment, he actually credited his kill to her as well. But then he backtracks and notices how she's being so stubborn about it. And he's like, you know what? You're right. I did it, and it was just a very believable as a brother and sister, attitude and dialogue, and just in my opinion. And I personally think he was a tribute to Billy in the original Predator, but that's just me, just the way I see it. His death actually was a bit emotional. I was very surprised of that. When I first watched it, I was like, oh man, like, you really did feel a bit of emotion with his death. And I loved how he did one more thing before, I think it was the wolf skull he used, and stabbing the Predator in the thigh, distracting the Predator so Naru could get away. I see a lot of people saying, oh, it should have been about him instead. I'm like, yeah, sure, maybe, but like, that's just not what we got, Tabi wasn't like one of those side characters that's like better than the main character per se. I still enjoyed Naru as a character as well, so they really balanced that out well. And Dan Trachtenberg did a really good job, again, like I mentioned in my other review, really balancing that out really well in his direction with their acting, the writing, and obviously probably the editing as well. So the one thing too I wanted to talk about is the dog. Such a great character. That dog, man, apparently the actual dog on set was really hard to work with, But again, that dog was just one loyal dog. And if you know anything about Native peoples and their dogs, because dogs predate horses, and at least in North America, in their presence, on the res where I'm from, we call them puppies. And res dogs are very known to just be ridiculously loyal if you treat them right, even though they've probably been through hell. A res dog could have a missing ear and a missing eye, scars everywhere, and still take a beating. Or run over 2 times and they'll still come home and be perfectly fine. But like, that dog was probably one of my favorite elements about this film too. And yeah, maybe it's a little cheesy, like how it helps her in the final battle and then how it lives, right? But like, you know, they followed one of the greater fan rules by not killing off the dog, in my opinion. I think if they killed the dog, it would have been, you know, people would have been up in arms. But res dogs, man, like, say what you want, but they are loyal as hell, man. I loved the dog. She went all the way back for the dog. Like, that's how much it says about the dog. And if you know anything about a lot of plains cultures, dogs were also valuable before the horses came along as kind of pack mules and also as food. So, you know, indigenous love for dogs goes really far back. I'm going to get into pretty nerdy specifics about the feral predator, and a lot of it is purely from speculation and everything. But like, as I mentioned in my other review, the feral predator was just intense. He was so reckless, and this is something I'm seeing kind of circulating around online. And I really don't know if this was the intention in the writing. A lot of people are speculating that this Yatcha in particular this is like his first hunt ever. And if you notice at the beginning, he gets kind of just dropped off, you know, or maybe his ship is being autopiloted by himself. I don't know. But to me, it kind of looks like he's dropped off. And so he's probably dropped off by his clan. We don't know for sure. But I like to think that this Yatcha is an unblooded, kind of unexperienced or newly appointed hunter, because the way he goes out of doing stuff is fascinating. Predator rules, or like the Yatcha cultural norms, I thought were interesting. The only skull that we see him rip out and trophy is the wolf skull. We didn't see him do that to the bear. We didn't see him do that to the other humans, which I thought was interesting. So maybe he thought that his fight with the wolf was admirable, I guess. I don't know. It's just interesting. He just goes out and like the moment, because he goes hand to hand with the bear, he doesn't bust out his toys until he comes across humans. The hand-to-hand thing with the bear, though, is just so sick. I thought it was so cool how, you know, we get to see him just be a little like towards the end, especially his fight with Tabi. He seems like a really bad sport, because he just disappears when Tabi is really about to get the upper hand on him. And so just the way that he plays with his new toys, for me, it's like he's busting out his new gear. That's what it felt like to me. But he reminds me of what Bane tells Bruce.
You fight like a younger man. Nothing held back. It's admirable, but mistaken.
Anyways, that's just my personal little thing about the Predator as kind of like a character. The other things I thought were interesting is the design. Now, I know a lot of people online are really kind of just ripping on the design, but like, I personally like it. And I've seen some people speculate whether or not if this Yatcha is part of the quote unquote super predator subspecies. Because if you know anything about the other ones, like in Predators, we had the super predators or the berserker predators, and those ones are bigger and just more intense looking. Their dreads look differently, their mandibles are wider, but it's just not specified, you know. And I think some people are, and I'm kind of speculating this one as well, but I think Dan Trachtenberg is thinking that this Yatcha is just like a completely different, from a different place. So we don't know for sure. If any of you hardcore, you know, XenoWiki folks know anything about it, let me know in the comments, because I was very curious. I thought it was a super predator at first, but then I had to look back at the design of Robert Rodriguez's super predators, and they look a little the same, but his face is just longer looking. His dreads are more fine, and they're like longer. They kind of look more like hair as opposed to like the shorter dreads, whatever. Anyways, next thing, his weapons. His weapons I thought were so interesting and different to the Predator franchise. Now, with each, I think with each Predator movie, with each Predator thing, we get new toys from these Yatcha. And one of my favorites actually was AVP2, the Wolf Yatcha. He had like a whip. And that was probably one of the coolest weapons that we've seen. He even had dual wielding plasma blasters and stuff like that. So like with each one, they introduce a new thing. With this one, I thought was so interesting is that this Yatcha just kind of stuck with the theme of the film. And, we're so used to seeing with the 3 dots, we're so used to hearing and seeing the plasma blast. But what I thought was so fascinating that it was a dart gun, basically. And the fact that it kind of went around, but whatever it targeted, it would go out and, go to wherever that target is. And I thought that was so interesting. And when we saw it, it looked like, I don't know, for me personally, it felt like it stuck with the colonial theme of the film, that it looked kind of like a flintlock pistol, which I thought was just so interesting and so cool. And the fact that it's like a biomask, I would love to know what they think that skull comes from. But the dart thingy, I like how that particular weapon design actually had something to do with the story. It's what Naru uses to kill it in the end with, going over and everything. And so I thought this Predator was probably one of the better ones we've seen. And like I mentioned, Dan DiLeggero, I keep calling him Dan DiLeggero. Is it Dan DiLeggero or Dan Leggero? I don't know. But his body performance, I thought was so cool. He just felt, I think, again, this is why I think it was a young blood, because it was just so confident in the way it moved. Again, the Dan Trachtenberg was really going for a more creature-like look or creature-like feel for this Yatcha, and I definitely got that. And it was a very cool, visceral Yatcha, and I appreciated it a lot. So a couple of things I didn't really quite mention in my regular review was this film definitely felt like a coming of age story, a typical hero's journey type story. I think that was a really good, safe thing, and for a Predator movie, that actually really works. She kind of reminded me a bit of like Luke Skywalker, right? And when it comes to Naru's motivations, again, in conjunction with like the overall story, and I guess maybe touching into like thematic elements too, it's like, it's not that like it's coming across as like, F the patriarchy type of attitude. It really is a personal thing for her. She's like, not only does she feel limited by her gender, but she also just, again, I like that moment after Tabi is, named the new war chief. I can tell that she's mostly mad at herself for failing. I don't know. She wants something more. She wants something a little deeper to her existence, And again, it kind of reminded me of Luke Skywalker, where Luke is like, I don't want to be a moisture farmer anymore. And so he winds up being thrown into the situation and joins the rebellion. Same thing with Naru. But she is like literally given, like, her call to action is both in seeing the Thunderbird in the sky, which is obviously the Predator ship, but also when she sees the Predator kill the bear. For me personally, I just thought it was a really cool character moment for her. And so, again, when it comes to pacing and everything, the story just felt tight. And I was surprised. I complained that it was short, but apparently this is about the longest they could get it. I'm actually glad that they managed to kind of string it out as much as they could. But regardless, the story is pretty tight. Naru is given she earns, in my opinion, again, she earns what she wants and desires. And it came out pretty well. Now, talking more in particular about certain elements of the story that I didn't talk about, that I kind of had personal gripes with, just really random nitpicks. The fur trappers. I thought it was weird how they decided to go with English for everyone speaking Comanche, right? So if they're speaking Comanche, they're speaking English. But then like the fur trappers, they're naturally speaking French. I thought that was a weird choice, but I guess it kind of helped to separate those people. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know, like I just felt like it kind of messed with the immersion even with the Comanche dub a little bit, but that's just my thing. The other thing too though is that the fur trappers felt a little cartoonishly bad. I just felt that they were a little too but that's just me. That was kind of me. I was like, they're a little too campy but they are red shirts in this movie, so there's that too. So the final fight though, that's the next thing I wanted to touch on. Is I see a lot of criticisms about the final fight. Yeah, maybe there are certain things that are convenient. I'd argue in any fight where a lot of skill is involved, I would argue that there is a good 5 to 10% of that skill is luck. Because sometimes you kind of have to make your own luck. And I'd argue Naru did all that she possibly could to make sure that she had the upper hand in the best way that she could. And there's one element that I have not yet seen somebody talk about as to why, one of the main reasons why Naru wins at the end. And that is the fact that she is a woman. Like, I just wish everyone kind of got that. Throughout the film, the Yatcha just rejects her as a threat. It sees her in the river, and if you look on his screen, it like scans her, and then the characters come up. But for me, I think that was maybe him like a bioscan of her, and it was like, oh, a female. And he's like, whatever. And the same thing when she gets caught. Same thing when it kills like all of her other tribesmen. It chases after her, but it only targets the other Comanche brave. It doesn't target her because he is the one he is the threat. And so she says it when she sets the traps, when she's taking the orange Tutsiya.
You think that I'm not a hunter like you, and I'm not a threat. That is what makes me dangerous.
And I think that's the biggest thing that people aren't seeing here. Just as me just ranting about how I don't see a lot of people talking about this as one of the main reasons why she wins, but is because the Yatcha does not see her as a threat, mostly because she is a woman. It has a code of conduct that it follows. It's established very well in the franchise that they don't kill women, they don't kill pregnant women, and they don't kill children, right? Or they don't really kill unarmed or injured people. They only kill what they deem as a worthy prey. And the whole time, and I'd argue, like, I would argue that, like, the moment comes to where she fights this Yatcha, like, after she shoots it in the back of the head and grabs its mask, I think up until that moment, the Yatcha's like, oh crap, this female. There's actually a moment when after Tabi gets stabbed, she's holding the pistol to try to shoot it, and it scans her, right? It scans her. If you look in the biomask, it scans her, but then it recognizes the weapon, and then he kind of steps back, and you can see him cocking his head a little bit, like, wait, you're a woman, but you have a weapon. I guess I'm gonna kill you. You know what I mean? And so I just thought that was like the main thing that people are missing here, is that one of the biggest advantages that she has against it is, first of all, its own weapons, but also its own code of conduct. The fact that it won't kill a woman or doesn't seem a woman as a viable prey. And she takes advantage of that and decides to take it down. And I think that's just one of the coolest ironies about the whole thing. It's so fascinating to me, is that, like, you know, that's one thing that people in the whole franchise we haven't really seen yet. Even in the last movie, the Yatcha that's taken in as a science experiment, it sees Olivia Munn's character naked and defenseless. It just looks in at her, and it's like, oh well, it just takes off, you know. So I just thought that was the biggest thing people are missing, and I thought in the writing that was one of the bigger strengths about this character. So many people are saying, you know, oh, I don't care, like, you know, I see a lot of hate towards the fact that she is a woman in this Predator movie, and the fact that, like, she beats it. A lot of people are like, she couldn't kill a bear, so how is she gonna be able to kill this Yatcha? Well, because the Yatcha underestimates, you know, who she is, and also underestimated her cunning and skill. She doesn't really go hand to hand until she jumps on him, and even when she does, she's like hacking the crap out of him, and he flings her away, and even then she gets hurt. But that's the only time she actually has like an intense physical contact with it. other than that, it's been chasing her around. You're right. It's trying to chase her. I thought, her using the darts against it, she didn't rely on her strength like a lot of people are expecting someone to. Arnie didn't necessarily rely on his strength. Yes, he did have to be big and strong to lift the log and all that, but like that was how he did it, and she saw something and took advantage of it. It's that simple. It was her cunningness, it was her ability to overcome and to adapt, to learn from mistakes of herself and others. That's what I liked about it. That's my main driving home point about why I liked her as a character, and why I thought having a female protagonist was such an interesting twist on, the whole thing. And so there's that. So that brings me to the orange Tutsiya. I asked Jane Myers about the orange Tutsiya, and I respect her answer a lot. And the orange Tutsiya was just one of those really cool literary tools I just thought was cleverly used. And when we learn about the orange Tutsiya, she mentions, hey, it cools the blood down. That was a very interesting thing that I thought that they brought into the story, where it was a bit of an indigenous element. And obviously, I like how she recognizes it. The predator can't see it because of the Tutsiya. I don't know. I just thought it was a really cool throw in there with how specifically an indigenous perspective about herbs and everything specifically helped in this situation. And I really liked how when she's stuck in the mud pit, that kind of subverts our expectation for her to go back and use that mud. She used it to try to trap the predator, right? And I thought that was a really cool subversion of how, we've seen it in the first Predator movie with the mud. We saw Adrian Brody use the mud in Predators, and we expect for her to do it in this, but it isn't the case. It's the orange Tutsiya flower. The other thing too I thought was cool was the Muppets. I mentioned earlier, but like in the Comanche dub, Muppets is used more often, and I asked Jane about the Muppets, and apparently the Muppets is a Comanche. It literally just means monster. I don't know. I would love to talk more with Comanche people and whether or not if it's a cryptid or not. But just the idea that they took something from Comanche lore and used it to describe the predator among the people at that time was a very cool and fascinating element to me. I like how specifically the Muppets is kind of like this ambiguous, scary monster in the night with beady eyes that it comes to get you. It's a monster. It's a children's story, I guess, to scare children, right? But in this case, it's freaking real. So that was the two things I talked about with Jane that I just thought were really cool and very interesting to me. The other things, again, I talked about how there's a song sung, and I'm talking about the very end, in particular, when Naru is named the new war chief. And the head chief sings a song. And I thought that was interesting how Sarah Shatner's score kind of comes in. I loved that theme. And that leads me to the score. The score by Sarah Sachner, which I thought was so interesting because I saw that she does more stuff with video games, and that really kind of stuck out to me. But like, she had some elements on there that like weren't super overt, like, oh, this is a native story, and like have like overt flutes and stuff like that. It was very subtle. There's some vocalizations in there, and the vocalizations are done by Robert Marable. He is a Pueblo flute maker and artist, and he also makes moccasins. And his voice is used throughout the film, and it's just like a light vocable. If you don't know anything about native music, vocables make up, like, I'd argue 80% of North American indigenous music. And you hear him kind of singing with the score and everything, but it's more atmospheric as opposed to like being an original song. But I just thought the score kind of really just helped with the atmosphere and really helped with that immersion without being a cartoony or without being really just in your face, like, ooh, this is a native film and stuff like that. I actually really liked her score for Assassin's Creed Valhalla and the work that she did with Einar Selvik. And I think I want to ask her, but like, I feel like her work in Assassin's Creed Valhalla definitely helped inform, like culturally helped inform how she scored this film. And I felt that was one thing I really wanted to talk about, but that scene in particular I thought was really interesting. And I would like to know too, like what direction she had from Jane or from Dan about incorporating certain cultural elements into the score. But yeah, that was another thing about native representation that I thought was interesting that I didn't quite expound on in my regular review. The one thing that I thought was very interesting, another YouTuber brought this up, and I couldn't stop thinking about it after he mentioned it. But like, it's interesting in that moment where Naru sees the skinned buffalo. The buffalo is skinned, right? And where did we see that before? Obviously, the last few Predator movies, where, especially in the first one, where it's skinned alive. Well, maybe not alive, but it's skinned. It's kills. And you would think, if you don't know anything, this is what I was referring to in my original video about colonial and native attitudes about hunting. And when I talked about something being in the past, this is what I was referring to about the early French trappers, and later on, the United States government, like almost 100 years later, they would skin the buffalo and take their tongues. For the French, it was just for the skins. It was for the fur, right? But they would leave the corpses on the ground to rot. And so that's why Naru does that little prayer, because this was like an atrocity. You know, this was, I don't want to draw too many modern parallels, but like when COVID hit, a lot of the farmers, because of the food supply, had to like burn their crops because it wouldn't keep up with demand, because the timing was messed up. And a lot of people had some very emotional reactions to that. And this is very similar. You know, this was their food source. It was their livelihood. The buffalo was everything to a lot of these tribes in the plains. And so it was interesting to see how that contrasted, you know, her attitudes against it. But it's just so interesting to think about it thematically, about how these hunters skinned these buffalo as for trophies and for stuff like that. And like the fur trappers kind of paralleled the Yatcha as a culture and species, where they kind of just hunted for sport, but they hunted for money for sure. An interesting parallel that I saw there was interesting, that kind of touched on something that happened in the past. Again, for the fur trappers at the time, it was more about taking the skins, but 100 years or so later, the United States government purposely killed a lot of the buffalo to reduce the dependency and food source of the plains tribes, to kind of starve them out and force them onto reservations. That was something that I thought was pretty interesting, and kind of let us know too, thematically, there are other predators out there. If there's one thing that I really gathered from the film too, is that it really is a dog-eat-dog world out there, especially back then, you know, when the world was just so brutal. It further pushes my assertion about survival and indigenous survival and whatnot. So it's just hard. Again, with a film like this, and like a franchise genre film, you know, that isn't a highbrow Dances with Wolves type film that's gonna win an Academy Award or anything. It's literally a genre sci-fi thriller that is being thrown onto a streaming service, right? But I don't know. I felt like this film, especially for a period film, just had way more respect. And they really tried, you know. Some people are comparing this to Mel Gibson's Apocalyptico. That film, I want to do a little video essay on that film in particular. I respect what they tried to do, but there are a lot of overall thematic issues with that film in particular, and I understand why people would be mad that this film didn't have that with the language and everything, because the language thing, the Comanche dub is actually pretty good. Unfortunately, it is obvious that it's a dub, but I can tell that they really tried. The audio mixing really makes an effort to make the audio match the environment that the scenes are taking place in, and you can actually really hear Dakota Beavers and Amber Midth and all the other characters. You can actually hear their voices, and it helps with the immersion of recognizing their characters. But unfortunately, you know, it's a dub, so when they're speaking Comanche, their lips obviously don't match what they're saying on screen. And I guess, again, I really don't know. I would love to ask Jane or Dan more specifically, like, where that decision ultimately fell. I have a huge feeling that it was Disney and Fox and Hulu all thought that they'd be more accessible with the original English, you know, dialogue. But like, there are other films like Apocalyptico, like they went through great lengths to try to make that as authentic. But I mean, like, that had a lot of immersion, and like the language didn't really detract from the story. Because I like the story of Apocalyptico, but I really don't like the attitude that it went about. Again, that's a whole nother video for a whole nother day. That's my other gripe with it, is just like, I just wish, you know, but we got the dub. You know, I can't complain too much about that. When it comes to a giant franchise film like this, just having that dub alone is good, but it could have been more. Going back to the emotional and thematic things like I talked about in my last video, it still stands. You know, I really do appreciate what went into the making of this film. I appreciate the, you know, just how well thought out a lot of things were, you know, and I hope to see more of this. I hope to see more indigenizing or adding indigenous characters to franchise films and stuff like that. So, but I think that's it. I think I'm done with my coverage for Prey. I really want to talk about Dark Winds. I just finished it the other day, and so I'll get a review out to you guys on that one. I might do what I did for Res Dogs and or chop up the episodes into the video. There's a lot to talk about with Dark Winds. Lots of things I really liked, lots of things I thought were kind of what, because I am Navajo, so I can say more things about it. So there's that. Be on the lookout for more of my stuff. Again, I'm debating whether or not if I want to get on the TikTok or not. Who knows? Whatever. Or maybe I'll just do Instagram stories. Again, there's still a lot more content that I want to talk to you guys about. The Prey thing kind of came in last minute, and I was asked to cover this, and so I still want to do my Star Wars video. I still want to finish that for you guys. Of course, Res Dog Season 2, Dark Winds, Rutherford Falls Seasons 1 and 2. Like, I have a lot of content for you guys, so if you want to support, great. I might do the super thanks feature, so if you feel inclined to do that, that'd be great. A couple more equipment things that I want to get to increase the value of my channel and everything. So thank you so much, guys. Follow me. I have a Facebook, and if you think Facebook is old, you're right, but I mainly set up a Facebook because a huge chunk of the Native communities is actually on Facebook. One of the biggest indigenous social media pages is on Facebook. So that's one of the main reasons I'm on that, is mostly because there are a lot of older natives and other native people who just don't really, you know, aren't active on Instagram. I notice more young natives are on Instagram and a lot of older natives are on Facebook. So that's why I decided to just be on both platforms. I'm not brave enough to be on Twitter yet, or I thought about Tumblr, but I don't know, whatever. I'll talk to you guys later.